Hello and welcome to The Right Idea, where we discuss the people, policy, and politics that drive Texas. I'm your host, Brian Phillips. I'm the Chief Communications Officer at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. And with me, as always, is my co-host, our Vice President of Policy, Derek Cohen. Session's kind of over. I mean, regular session, we hardly knew you.
Well, it's officially over. We can at least say that much. Well, of course, we're here in the special session, at which there appears to be a bit of a logjam at the moment. But, so hope springs eternal that gets resolved.
And multiple special sessions on the way is what it sounds like. I think we don't have to hide from that anymore. That's definitely a thing that we're going to do. So we have a lot to get to. Even though the regular session is over, we definitely want to do kind of our own recap. I know that our faithful listeners and faithful watchers know that we didn't have this episode last week because, we both weren't here. Derek worked last week. I did not. But Derek was on a
nobody wants to work these days.
On a panel with several other of our folks at TPPF doing a recap, and I think that's what we used that episode. I thought was a good panel. Good panel to go through kind of the wins and the good, the bad, the ugly of session. We'll do a little bit of that here, but we're back this week just so we can kind of chat about now that we've had a chance to exhale because that event happened like right after we got out of session and then went right back into special session. So we've had a chance to breathe and a chance to kind of evaluate kind of what happened over the session. Again, kind of doing a good, bad, and the ugly. But I want to do a segment that I like to call But First. But first, we have some big news and nationally. A government whistleblower, has said that the U.S. has an intact alien vehicle. The Pentagon denies it. U.S. House of Representatives has announced it will hold a hearing on it, actually. So I've got to ask you, Derek, do you think that there are aliens in the world or not?
Yeah, I mean, here's where, I have to get in the obligatory right-wing joke about Hillary Clinton and whatnot. And I'll also put on the record I'm not suicidal in case anything happens. No, all joking aside, it's the UFO issue has always fascinated me, not because, in a Mulder or Scully I want to believe kind of way. It's always fascinated me in a way on how they always seem to keep tiptoeing around this precipice, but it never seems to go over. And my brother's definitely more plugged into that whole world than I am, and so he always gives me a decent level set on that. In fact, he's the one who sent me that particular article. And I read
Alien Hunter.
What was that? Not necessarily. No, I'm unfortunately not at liberty to speak out what he does do for a living. But no, he is plugged into that realm. And the aliens thing, like I said, it always fascinates me. But then when you start getting into it, and the personalities involved, you're always like, couldn't they, couldn't a sane person have said this?
Well, I don't know if they're real or not. I do know that they are real on TV, which are the only aliens that I know. So I don't know, maybe your favorite famous alien?
Well, again, and we've had a bit of a debate on this, I know, in weeks past, where it's like, where do we put Predator, right? Predator's whole shtick is being anti-alien.
That's true.
But he's not of this planet.
They're both aliens.
Yeah, so it got this transitive property of Predator.
The only aliens I know apparently are from the 80s, because when I started to think about the aliens that I knew, it was like Mork from Mork and Mindy and Alf and the ones from The Simpsons. I don't know any aliens past the 90s, so maybe I'll have to
Don't blame me, I voted for Kodos.
Okay, all right. Well, that's enough of that. So now we know where you stand on alien policy. All right. Well,
Soft on aliens.
We are going to get to a couple of issues. We're going to do kind of our recap, but we do want to get some issues that came up this week on border security and things. I want to make sure we highlight that. As always, my favorite shameless plug is for our weekly newsletter called The Post, and you can subscribe to that at texaspolicy.com/thepost, texaspolicy.com/thepost. It's our weekly comprehensive look at everything that's going on, all the stuff that TPPF is working on, all the things we're commenting on, and it's got some fun stuff in there. It's got a weekly exclusive column from me, and so we hope that you subscribe to that if you're not already. All right, so we'll get into the 88th regular. Like I said, we hardly knew you. It just went by so fast. What I call signing day. I mean, this week has been, signing day, of course, refers to high school kids signing, the athletes. But there was a lot of bills signing this week, and so a lot of bills became laws officially by signing by the governor. We're going to get, like I said, some border talk. There's some bills that passed the Senate that is some unfinished business, along with things like property tax and school choice, but also some issues on the border. So some important bills that passed the Senate this week. And then, of course, as always, we're TPPF, so we have to talk about school choice. choice, and so we've done some work on that, and so we want to chat about kind of where we stand on school choice, and that should wrap us up. But let's get into your Lege-Land update, which is really kind of the point of this whole episode, really, Derek. Is there anything that you left on the table from last week when you discussed our recap that you'd like to chat about today about the 88th regular?
No, and I want to take that opportunity to frame this as well, because I think Greg did a good job during that discussion. Obviously, especially with our particular priors, we can point to, what was left on the table or what didn't get done. And we'll point towards school choice, we'll point towards property tax relief, even though I still hold out hope that the two chambers will, again, whether it's Lou parent trapping them or them just working it out on their own, that they'll come to an actual agreement and something that can move forward, and school choice being what it is. Obviously, we know they're probably going to be coming back. I believe it's been reported that they'll be coming back in September for that. But that being said, with those particular, black eyes, fully forefront, you can't say that this wasn't a successful session on many, many conservative issues. Now, again, of course, it pales in comparison when some like marquee items don't get across the line. But, we've talked at this table about things like the Death Star bill, so-called, things about that have been done in the education space, such as with the curriculum work that a lot of folks around here have worked on, as well as folks up at the building. Just the absolute running of the tables that child welfare had. And, these aren't small things. These are things that actually affect real Texans. And, just because they're not Texans with big Twitter followings or Texans with big microphones in front of them doesn't mean that it doesn't help. I remember one of the debates that we've seen in the child welfare space. I think it was Representative Busey's bill about actually these kids that are in the child welfare system, actually getting them backpacks or suitcases so that they can store so they literally have a place to put stuff that they own. And like, if you look at that, is there a fiscal note there? Is that going to change? Is that a massive game changer for child welfare? No, but as far as providing an element of human dignity to those caught in that process, I can't think of many things more important. Now, when we did have serious structural reforms. We did have a CPS omnibus. We did get rid of hidden foster care and a number of things in that particular realm. But that being said, those are the things that usually don't get seen by the pundit class, of which we're sitting here doing pundit stuff right now. But the people that usually the chattering class on the legislature. But these are things that affect real people, and there are going to be real people that have real benefit from this.
Yeah, I've got I printed out. We obviously keep really good records and track of everything that passes, and particularly stuff that conservatives work on, and TPPF as an organization we work on. And I've got 7 pages here of things that passed. These aren't just things that we worked on or things that conservatives wanted or some agenda that we printed out at the beginning of the year. This is actual laws that passed the House and Senate and are on their way to the governor. And I've got over 70 items here, just as you said, on all kinds of things, from education to election integrity to healthcare to energy. And fiscal issues. There was a lot, and we do need to be able to talk about those more, and we'll probably package this in some kind of way and get it out to people so that they can see all of the conservative policies that were passed. One thing I do want to back up though on this, and you talked about framing. It's, to me, I see it as there were really 2 buckets this year, and things that really encouraged me. So the one is good conservative traditional policy, right? Like things like property tax or school choice, or things like fixing bad government. Even Medicaid, which conservatives aren't too hot on Medicaid, but the fact is it exists, and it exists for certain people, and it should work for those people at least. And so there were some fixes. Even
why are we paying for it if not?
Exactly. Why are we paying for it? A lot of conservatives say, well, that's the point, is that we shouldn't have government welfare. But to the extent that we're going to have it, to the extent that we're going to have government programs at all, Medicaid included, they should work for the people for whom they're intended. And we did a lot The legislature did a lot to fix some of those things. So point is, there was a lot of sort of boilerplate good conservative policy that passed.
Yeah.
And then the second bucket, which I thought was very encouraging, is that, there's always been kind of the three legs of the stool, so to speak, in conservatism with national security, fiscal policy, and then social policy, or what people might call the culture wars. Well, for a lot of conservatives, the culture wars are the war for the future of Texas, the war for the future of the country, and that can include all kinds of things, like, of course, the gender modification of minors and the sort of radical transgender racial ideology that's being pushed by the progressive left. You saw that in bills, trying to limit the kinds of materials that are in classrooms, the kind of sexually explicit materials that are in libraries. You saw Texas really rise up, and it's one of a few states that's done this, like Florida and others. But really, Texas rise up and say, absolutely not. We're going to proactively, directly, and aggressively push back against this leftist propaganda, this leftist agenda that is intentionally and forcefully trying to change society. So I was really encouraged that conservatives who may in the past have looked at that and said, well, those are the culture wars. We'll let certain organizations fight those, or we'll let other folks fight that. They stepped up this year and said, no, this is something that we're going to take on and we're going to go win.
Well, it's so fun. I mean, it's laughable because you see the folks who are, why are particular groups getting involved in these fights? Why are folks fighting these culture wars? These were never an issue in the past, and it's like, well, if this were just like complete unprovoked unilateral action, if this was Iraq invading Kuwait, this would be one thing.
Right.
But no, what this is it's essentially, you will use these pronouns. You will have this material in schools. You will do X, you will do Y, you will do Z.
And if you don't do it, you're a bigot, and you need to be silenced and take your free speech taken away.
Yeah, and it gets to the point where, and another one of the wins that happened this session was HB 17 with the writing in rogue prosecutors. They go, you know what? The people who elected me are overwhelmingly liberal, so I'm not going to enforce conservative law. And well, the hell you will. You are actually taking taxpayer dollars, so you will be enforcing the laws of the state. And that's one of the things where, again, it's not necessarily, the conservatives saying, conservatives like trying to tell these particular offices or these particular individuals what to do, but when seen left to their own devices, we've seen the outcome of that, and I think that is no longer palatable for a vast majority, as your polling has indicated.
And that's true, and it also, we didn't get everything done. I mean, there's still some things out there. I mean, I know we eliminated DEI at universities, but I mean, the proof will ultimately be in the pudding as to whether some of these good policies actually are executed in a way that actually starts to turn the tide here and creates the culture at some of these institutions that has been eroded and rotted out in the last 5 or 10 years. And so there may be more work to do. I mean, we just saw, we had these really good bills, HB 4 and HB 18, which are, supposed to protect your data privacy and protect kids online from some of the harms of social media, and protect kids from being able to access, pornographic websites and those kinds of things. And then this huge story breaks this week in the Wall Street Journal about how Instagram is not only allowing these networks of pedophiles to exist, but is actually promoting it. And as they engage with the material, it actually promotes and pushes this material out to people who it thinks would be for this audience or would be part of this audience or whatever. And so there's still, even though we've got really strong protections, and frankly the bills that we passed in this legislature are some of the strongest in the nation, just the reports this week demonstrate that Texas has a lot to do.
And it's funny because, of course, the leftist critique of that is not, oh my goodness, what are we going to do to hold Instagram to account? It's like, actually, Brian, it's minor attractive persons.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Here comes the language, right? Gender affirming care, minor attracted I don't think minor attracted persons is going to take off like gender affirming care quite did.
Probably not.
But again, another report came out either the end of last week or this week that the University of Texas, right here, a few blocks up the street, is housing this free speech police organization that is going out and writing these reports, basically saying that if you're a conservative organization, you're spreading disinformation. organization. I mean, obviously it doesn't say it that way, but that's kind of the point, is that these leftist organizations, they put out this material that is supposed to look like, rigorous research, or it's supposed to look like academic research, when really it's all just propaganda. And of course they use that then to promote these new rules and regulations about what you can and can't say online, or to essentially, what the purpose of this free speech police organization is at UT is to give advertisers license to no longer give those organizations any money, and saying, well, the Washington Examiner or the Daily Caller, is spreading misinformation, and so we're not going to advertise with them anymore.
And piggybacking on that, I'm sure you saw the story that the SPLC has had, like, for Moms for Liberty and whatnot,
yes,
to their. And now, granted, nobody, I don't even think any centrists really give the SPLC the time of day anymore, just because it's basically just a scandal-ridden grift mill at this point. But that being said, is again, it's weaponizing. It's this appeal to authority weaponization, and I think that people are just coming around to it.
So, and I noticed that some of those groups are probably the best thing that happened to them was being added to that list, because they did a bunch of fundraising or something off of it. It probably helped their donor base.
It's almost like certain sheriffs going after Ron DeSantis for.
Precisely, exactly. And there's been some news there's been some new entrants into the presidential race as well as DeSantis. All right, so I just to wrap up kind of this segment, unless there's a few other things you wanted to hit. I just think that it's great that Texas is leading on this, that Texas is not ignoring this, that there is certainly a strain of conservatives who say, well, we shouldn't, there's other things to worry about, or that's not, we can't, the stuff they said 10 years ago about no one's ever going to force us to believe that men can be women and women can be men, and of course here we are. So I think it's encouraging that a place like Texas, which is really the beacon of freedom and liberty and prosperity and opportunity, is taking a very aggressive approach to this, but while also at the same time not ignoring our conservative bona fides, so to speak, and hitting all that. So anything else on the regular session that we wanted to hit before we move on to the specials?
I mean, regular session was like years ago. I mean, it was almost like 10 days?
Yeah, man, it just feels it's hard to see. So that the sort of the finish, the real wrap up there, of course, is that the governor is now signing these bills. So I wanted to highlight a couple. That were really interesting to us. Obviously, Monday was a big one. Was the preventing the gender modification of minors. That one was signed on Monday. That was a really big one. That goes into effect on September 1st. And of course, there was a huge fight over that. And so the fact that the conservatives got that through both the House and the Senate and got that to the governor's desk is a real big win. Anything else the other bills that the governor's been signing this week that you've been following that just to let our folks know, it's not just about the legislature. We got to get this last.
You got to separate two things. You got to separate the signing from the signing ceremony, and we're also one of the states that doesn't have a pocket veto. We basically have pocket signing, called filing, wherein if the governor doesn't affirmatively sign something but doesn't veto it as well, then it still becomes law. But
I don't think I knew that. Well, that's interesting. Yeah. Okay. Great.
Well, not only that, but then if you've seen, we were starting to see the signing ceremonies. For example, I mentioned HB 17. You and I were part of SB 490, the medical transparency. So the whole signing process, again, we don't want to read too much into it, saying this bill was filed versus this one was signed, so the governor must like this one and hate this one, when these are really just in the weeds administrative functions at this point. Now, don't get me wrong, if there's something that needs vetoing, I think we can clearly say that if it's vetoed, that the governor doesn't much appreciate it or doesn't appreciate a particular element of it that he'll usually discuss in his veto statement. But for example, the ceremonial signings, I wouldn't say oftentimes, but sometimes happen, a decent amount after they've actually had the practical, the actual administrative signing. And in doing so, that's more of an opportunity to lift up the policy item, to lift up the authors, obviously. I remember when the heartbeat bill was signed, that I'm surprised at how they fit all those people in that room.
A lot of fathers for that victory.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And that was just kind of illustrative of the point that this is something that is usually more for, celebrating the effort, celebrating the policy victory. And obviously and the governor does take advantage of it to really uplift what this means for the state.
I also think it's interesting to see some of those, particularly at the ceremonies where they get all the groups and everybody, and some of the strange bedfellows that end up, standing behind the governor and smiling and waving. And I think it does show, a diversity of opinion, particularly, I mean, even on just the conservative side of things, that, some organizations can disagree with each other on certain policies, but then can get together on, healthcare or education or something, even though we may disagree on how to do property tax or how to do, the border or something like that.
We'll take HB 17 alone. I just looked at the photo spray from that, and it was, there was, I wouldn't say as many, but there were a decent amount of Democrats in that picture. And so that goes to show, like, this, when it comes to rogue prosecutors, it's not a matter of, a partisan fight, even though a lot of people wish, want it to redound to that, because that makes it both easier for them to understand, but also it makes it comports with a cleaner worldview of, Republicans bad, Democrats good, or whatever the case might be. But obviously, when it comes to policymaking, like, it's a lot more complex. There's a lot more interests at play, and to be honest with you, there's a lot more I wouldn't even say three-dimensionality, but dimensionality among the electorate than we want to tend to believe.
And that's also something we don't spend a lot of time on because it's not sexy and it's not conflict, which is a lot of these bills. I mean, a lot of the stuff that conservatives are taking, a lot of credit for and a lot of victories for, a lot of them had huge bipartisan majorities that went through. Some of them were unanimous. I mean, I think the online bills that we talked about here, I mean, most of them, if it had any pushback at all, I think there was just a few. And sometimes it's coming from the hard right, it's coming from the far right more than anything. But for example, the transparency bill that that the governor signed yesterday that we were a part of, that bill had huge bipartisan support for. So, despite all of the mudslinging that goes on, or the fact that, that everyone says, oh, we're such a conservative state and we're such a hard right state, and, Democrats haven't won here in 25 years, whatever, that belies sort of the fact that there's a lot of bipartisan agreement, that at the end of the day, we're all Texans, and that there is there's a lot of bipartisan agreement that gets overlooked by a lot of the legislation that gets passed. But in speaking about not enforcing the law with those rogue prosecutors, that's a good segue into yesterday, I believe it was, that the Senate revisited some border bills. And that was part of the call. Everyone's, obviously the biggest drama is over what we're going to do on property tax. But part of the call, of course, was the border bills. And the Senate did its job yesterday and passed three really strong bills I want to talk about and get kind of your opinion on this and kind of what's next for these bills. Just go through them real quickly. The first one made illegal entry a state crime. Obviously, illegal entry is a federal crime, but making it a state crime opens up certain opportunities for enforcement. It created the second bill created the Texas Border Force, which was not a bipartisan thing during the regular session. In fact, there was a lot of controversy around the border force, and frankly, it was a lot of misinformation, and we can talk about what that was. But the second bill,
we better go up to the University of Texas, find out about it.
Yeah, exactly. And then the third one, increased penalties for human smuggling, particularly the cartels and the human smugglers who oversee these stash houses, right? Which is where all of they go in these horrific, these horror stories about 50 people living in one room and not being able to eat or whatever. So that was the third bill, was that it increased penalties for that. Senate has done a really good job this year of crafting this legislation, of making sure that it got the support it did, and getting it out again. But here we are in the special, and the Senate has had to pass these bills again. What's your take on these bills in general in terms of policy, but then also in terms of progress?
So we have a lot of headwinds here, specifically on the border issue. Not least, one of the things I can't believe we mentioned, talking about how we're in the special, is that the House adjourned sine die already. After passing the two items that were specified by the governor, and that which included the Stash House bill, and of course we can talk ad nauseum, and we have in the past, about the points of order this session and how they've just been absolutely insane and off the reservation. But that being said, that was one of the ones that got popped on that because, ironically enough, because it included the illegal entry. So they were saying that it was multi-subject. So the governor said, okay, here's the call: property taxes, and it was very prescriptive about that, and then also stash house. And so they pass the stash house bill out of the House, and then again gavelled out. So the stash house bill, I think, is a good one, but again, it's a necessary but not sufficient one into fighting the transnational crime we see specifically down at the border. And I think that one of the things that really needs to be established is we need to know, and it needs to come from the Democrats, is we need to know what is your solution. Because, obviously we've, been working in the policy space on healthcare for a long time. We knew that, the post-Obamacare policy arguments were like, okay, so what's your solution? Our solution is repeal, and then it was repeal and replace.
From the Republican side.
Yeah, the Republican side. And then it just turned out or the conservative side, and then it just turned out to be like, well, we just don't like it. And it's
Obamacare light or something awful.
Yeah, and then it turned out to be like all these, fits and starts trying to, triangulate or quadrangulate where the, the electorate was. But it turns out is we've never actually, on our side, on the healthcare side, came to an agreement on the particular underlying law, and I think we all don't like it. But again, it's what do you do about it then?
Right.
And that's the dark argument. Same thing with this. Obviously, the Democrats, given their chicanery in the House, aren't don't much care for the border force, don't care for enforcement, just like other crimes. But then what's the plan then? Because we're seeing children dying on a near daily basis. We just had the video come out yesterday where the child was almost dehydrated to death, forced to go through all that. This is a humanitarian crisis, and their answer it seems to be open borders. And the irony is, and I know that even libertarians tend to agree, they're like, oh, well, we need an orderly process which all these people come in. Well, if you do that, we still need to stop people and check them.
Right.
We still can't have people coming across the border. So how are you going to? So the border
part of the order of the orderly process is being able to say no.
So it almost requires secure. I wouldn't say it almost. It requires having a secure border so that we can throw the gates wide open to their effect. But the problem is, if you're not willing to do that, then you are just perpetuating the status quo. And I want to know from their side what absolutely is in that status quo that they find defensible.
Because right now the perception is from the Democrat side, let them in, feed, house, and clothe them indefinitely. Let them make their case that that asylum is warranted if they don't like their living conditions back home, or if there's too much crime back where they live, they can come into America and that's worthy of asylum, and then set everybody free into the country. And of course, that's not an orderly system.
Parole.
Right, that's not an orderly system. I mean, that's and that's what I mean. By the end of it, there's no point at which the Democrats are saying even if they say let them in, feed, house, and clothe them for an indefinite period of time until they go before the judge. They're not saying, oh yes, and then a large majority of those people should be deported or should go back home or don't have a justified reason for claiming asylum and staying here. They've never said that. It's just that's part of the process to get as many people into the country as possible. I mean, that's their system. It's not orderly, but that's their system for doing that, and that's why I think we rightly look at that and say, well, that's an open borders policy.
Well, and the cartels are getting rich off of it. The cartels are getting rich. People are dying. People who genuinely want a better life for themselves and their family. I mean, obviously, we know that that's intermixed with a lot of unauthorized economic migrants, which we can debate the policy when we actually debate immigration. But all of that is so far down the road if we can't even secure the border.
And to the other point is, there's a ton of people, there's countless number of people who are trying to do it the right way, who are trying to come in here and are getting backlogged 5-10 years, can't get an answer. Meanwhile, we've got tens of thousands of people coming across every week, every month, and so it's just a mess. Back to the Texas laws, a lot of folks will look at this and they'll criticize and say, well, that's not enough, or that's not going to stop the flow. Right. I mean, people have to understand that, at the end of the day, it still is a federal responsibility to do this, and that's because the federal government has, much more of the resources to be able to go in, and not just that, but the resources, but the legal authority to do things that the state can't do. And so while we're, obviously the state is trying, making illegal entry a state crime, that will now open up opportunities for folks in the state, for state-based law enforcement to enforce the law. The Texas Border Force is literally creating a force that will help enforce border rules, a state-based force to do that. And then obviously going after the cartels, specifically targeting the stash houses and the cartels, increasing the penalties, making sure that, and again, this wouldn't necessarily, I don't think it's a deterrence because of all the money that's being made through human smuggling, but at the very least, the people that we catch, we can put away for longer periods of time. Again, is that the end all be all? We can wipe our hands and say we've secured the border? No, but these are some things that definitely are moving us in the right direction. So anyway, but the point remains, it's still just passed the Senate. The House has not passed these bills in the special, and so the prospects for, other than the stash houses, so the prospects for these bills ultimately to get to the governor's desk still are kind of in limbo. Right. And there's some questions about whether or not the House can, I don't know what the process is. You tell me to reopen, unsine die the legislature to consider some of these legislation.
So actually, it was interesting because Chairman Leach was in yesterday receiving messages. Now, I mean, it's one of those things where obviously he didn't have the quorum to transact business because literally nobody else was there outside of staff. But, he was in there, on the gavel and receiving messages. So I would something I've been interested in, something I've been looking into. I have yet to discover a mechanism whereby within this special that they can reconvene. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I'm just saying I have not seen it yet. Some of the, I would say, again, not to make a value judgment, but worse ideas out there were like, oh, well, why can't the governor just order, that this special session's over, and then call another one immediately? And I was like, well, I could see the curb appeal for that, but here in the United States and in Western democracy generally, dissolving legislatures is usually not something we go to. And so even when you get, legislators, doing things that you might not agree with, the fact that they're still duly elected and have constitutional authority is something that you need to square with that. And so that's one of the things where I don't know what a mechanism may exist, and I'm more than happy to read any suggestion that it does, but I simply don't know of a way to come back on that.
It's true. I mean, because that's definitely someone like me who doesn't know quite the process as well as you do.
Why are you a tyrant, Brian?
Yeah, but it's a good point. But that, if they can't get any business done, or the bills that are passing in the Senate can't get passed in the House, then then it looks to people like me on the outside. Well, then this special session's basically done for. You need to call another one, which obviously the governor doesn't have a problem with, because I think there was a 3-hour recess or 3-hour lag before the first special session was taken. So if that's not an option, or if there's, I guess if folks are looking at what the options are for the House to see if they can reopen, I guess that's probably not the official
reconvene. I suppose
reconvene.
No, and like I said, I am more than willing to hear out any argument, but because I'm completely open minded on that, I just have not heard I've just not heard a plausible one outside of letting this one expire and then just having a separate second special call.
I have heard, Senate can do whatever it wants to do. The House can do whatever it wants to do. The governor can, add to the call, and maybe that's true. I don't know. But
well, the governor can add to the call, and the Senate can do whatever it wants to do, but the House really can't do anything because it doesn't exist at the moment, so to speak.
Well, hopefully we'll have a House next week, and we can get some of these bills, particularly the border bills and other issues done. So, in the few remaining minutes that we have, of course, we are TPPF, so we have to talk about school choice. I kid, it actually is one of the most important issues that we're going to continue to deal with. And despite the opponents of school choice declaring victory, when of course that's not what happened at the end of the regular session, everyone knew that these bills were going to come back. Everyone knew. The governor made it very clear that we were not done by any means with school choice or ESAs, that these would be coming back. So my question is, I'm just looking, are you hearing any intel about what's going forward, or any legislation? There are no bills, so we don't really have any policy necessarily to talk about other than what's kind of out there and what's already been voted on and those kinds of things. But in terms of negotiations and creating a package or something like that, perhaps for the special session, what do you hear?
Well, the only thing that I would put out there, I would put out to the broader public, is that the negotiations are ongoing, and not only that, but I do believe that, and again, because it's been publicly reported that again they're going to be reconvening close to September. Other than that, I really wouldn't want to imperil too much of those discussions. But that being said, I think the symmetry of power here, is going to force a lot of folks to have to come to the table. And, I mean, it's some of the votes that have been taken are such bad looks because it's almost like an article of faith for some of these individuals. We had HB 100, which was a fairly sweeping school funding bill. Which where the Senate went over and put, a modicum of school choice in there. Not even not what you or I would consider universal or even, a great opening salvo, but like enough of a beachhead on there to say, okay, let's give this thing a go, right? And the House was like, well, that's dead. That bill's dead. I'm not even going to have it. And I was like, well, it's because because what you don't want to do, or what the individuals who decided to go down this path didn't want to do, was they didn't want to put even the bad school choice Republicans on record for voting down teacher pay raises, voting down increased funding. Now, I want to say something about that because everyone says, oh, well, that you're holding teacher funding hostage. Texas does not fund teachers. We, at the state level, now there are mechanisms by which we can give money to the school districts earmarked for that, but largely teacher salary is a local issue. Mm-hmm. Texas establishes the minimum teacher salary. In fact, that's what you remember Representative Talarico, that was kind of his approach. Let's give teachers a $15,000 pay raise, and that was essentially it. Just again, let's raise that floor. Right. And it was perfectly within his constitutional authority to file that bill. Now we can debate the merits of the bill, of course, but he was, that was not a controversial bill from a structural standpoint. Right. Like it's something that we can all agree on.
So basically, if you're upset that teachers don't make as much as they make, that's on the districts, not on the state.
I would say go to your superintendent who's making $350,000 a year while sending out snarky tweets, and ask why the teachers aren't getting a cut of that. Mm-hmm. The administrative bloat in Texas K-12 education is absolutely staggering. And of course they go, oh, well, we have to, Americans with disabilities, stuff like that. Yeah, some of that is driven by federal policy. Some of that's driven by state policy. I'll fully stipulate to that. There is no justification that a school district with, 3 digits worth of kids, even if it's 999, needs to have a superintendent making $300,000 plus other benefits, because that would not even withstand market scrutiny.
Right.
Now, of course, obviously school's not a market because, God forbid that we have any sort of competition, that we have any sort of a pricing for value for labor in that, because I guarantee you're not getting that much labor out of these superintendents. Of course, that's not my beat. That's James Quintero's beat when it comes to naming and shaming superintendents for what they're making and checking their pockets that way. I just say it's one of these ones where the sanctimony from some of these guys that, take home, these princely sums, far more than the actual governor of the state, and, have this micro fiefdom, but still think that they have the imprimatur to dictate to us what that's going to be. It's insane.
Yeah. So, they're making tons of money, but they're begging for it. The district is broke. Okay.
I make $350,000 and we got this brand new Jerry World looking stadium, but why are schools underfunded?
Yeah. Water parks or whatever. But then, of course we have teachers that spend an average of $500 of their own money on classrooms, for materials.
Take it out
of
the superintendent's side.
Yeah. So it's not even about, more or less funding for schools, but which can be a debate. On both sides. But looking at the prioritization of what they're spending their money on in the first place, that we should probably start with that. But getting back to the current debate and the negotiations in the last couple minutes, the one thing I just want to put out to conservatives, this goes all the way to Congress, and it goes onto a number of different issues just that I've seen over the last 20 years of watching all of this stuff and being part of it, is a lot of times conservatives, when we fight with the left on this, the left's negotiation tactic is, if you want something and I want something, that a compromise is you get a little bit less of what you want and I get nothing. And that, to me, has been how conservatives have been treated, or school choice proponents have been treated.
Not all conservatives.
Yeah, not all conservatives. Yeah, have been treated in Texas for the last 20 years. Is that anything that has any modicum of choice, anything that allows parents in the smallest way to exercise some kind of leverage or over where their kids go to school, unless you're basically special ed, you really have no ability to move your kids other than uprooting your entire life and moving to a completely different district. But in these legislative negotiations, particularly on this, conservatives always come to the table with school choice or with ESAs or whatever, and always leave with maybe the opposition gets a little bit less of funding here or authority there or reform there, a little bit less of what conservatives want on the other side, but then actually walk away with nothing. They haven't gained anything. Right. And then, some of our folks end up declaring victory because, we took away this, thing that they wanted, that they were willing to give up in the first place, and they walk away as though that's some sort of negotiating victory. And I'll just tell you, watching the governor, seeing the grassroots and the uprising, really, not to use that sort of terminology, but uprising of parents over the last two or 3 years, I just don't think that's going to be good enough anymore. I just don't think that this governor is going to accept something where we get nothing on school choice. I certainly don't think parents are going to accept, parents who then become voters next year are going to accept anything less than some form of school choice or some legitimate, meaningful kind of ESA.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. But, like we've said, the educrat establishment now exists to perpetuate its own existence. There's not a single, they don't even talk about the kids usually in their own rhetoric. Mm-hmm. It's more, why are you trying to defund public schools? Not, why are you trying to defund students? Because that's you want to step in that octagon with us, we'll have that discussion any day. But it's, why do you want to defund the administration? And I'm like, well, I'll take that one on as well. But I think you're exactly right.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's all the time we have for today. We appreciate you and being with us as always and listening and watching. I did want to give a pitch. Last week we had, not only the event that Derek was at, in which we did a recap, we also had the governor was here on Friday, and so we have that video that you can watch, as well as the lieutenant governor was here prior to that. I think right after, even before our event, he was here giving his
lieutenant
recap.
Governor was here on was it Monday or Tuesday?
I think it was Monday or Tuesday.
Yeah,
but it was
Tuesday,
even before our event. And so we had the lieutenant governor, then we had our event, and then we had the governor was here, all giving their recaps or legislative recaps. So if you missed any of that, all of that is on our YouTube page, along with every other episode that we've had of The Right Idea. So you can go check that out there. I want to give a pitch for that as well, so you don't miss those things. So we really do appreciate all of your listeners, all of our watchers, and as we like to say every week, do good and risk the consequences. We'll see you next week.